Anju, it's a pleasure to have you with us here at Durban. We want to know what's happening on the terrain of climate finance in the climate change negotiations. What's been happening at COP17 and what kind of outcome do you expect from COP17?
Okay. Well, as you know, Pratap, climate finance has been one of the most volatile subjects under the climate change negotiations, right from the word go, as a matter of fact. And there are two main issues. One, of course, is where the money comes from, how much money is needed, what does it cover. And the other issue is to do with the institutional architecture, who manages this money, who decides what projects get funded and things like that. And insofar as the institutional architecture is concerned, it used to be the GEF. That was one of the operating entities that was identified after the Rio conference. And unfortunately, it's been a very, very rocky relationship between the GEF and developing countries. So developing countries have constantly raised issues with the way the GEF functions, with the fact that it's a very, very long, what they call initial project cycle, where you even get to the point of getting any money from them. There have been problems with the fact that it's so project-based that it requires often for co-financing. So there have been a lot of problems, and unfortunately the architecture has not allowed for those problems to be addressed seriously. So although the GEF is meant to be accountable to the COP, and the COP has consistently sent guidance, the fact that the same guidance is repeated year after year means that effectively nothing's happened, nothing's progressed. It's continued to be an acrimonious subject. Now, in the past few years, there has been sort of incremental steps towards improving this. So in the beginning, there was even resistance to any sort of new funding mechanism, and the GEF seemed to be the only operating entity that was there. But then what happened was that there was this money that came in from CDM. And there, developing countries could very rightly claim that, look, this is not money that is coming to us from your coffers. This is money that's being raised from the CDM, and we rightfully should have a say in the way this is governed. And that led to the adaptation fund being formed. That was a very, very politically charged process as well, where many arguments had to be made throughout. And finally, we did end up with the adaptation fund, which had, we knew from the very beginning that it would not have that much money because it was so dependent on the CDM. But I think what its importance really is in the precedent that it set, which is to say that this is a fund where there is equal representation from developed and developing countries, and that there will be that they will have some say in the way it's managed. The second innovative feature of the adaptation fund is that it did away with the need for developing countries to have to go through multilateral institutions. So they had this what was called direct access, and that was a very difficult process too, because the first thing that they had to do was sort of figure out where does the fiduciary risk lie, and they had to decide that there would be national implementing entities, so to speak. So anyway, we have this adaptation fund board. It's seen as a model. It's early to say how well it functions, but basically here in Durban now we're calling for the next step, which is to say that, look, hopefully, if we even look at the commitments that have been made, which is 100 billion by 2020, this is a vast amount of money. And if you want an institutional architecture for this, you can't have a global bureaucracy managing this money, because it's going to need way too many people. I mean, this is bigger than the World Bank even, right? So
is the World Bank jealous about that?
They're not just jealous. Well, they try to elbow their way in. I'll just come to that right now. But basically, so what happened was that the World Bank, it's going to be bigger than the World Bank. So one of the arguments that we've been making is to say that, look, you don't want to build up this massive international bureaucracy, and in any case, you've learned, hopefully through the GEF, etc., that this sort of global decision making for projects that are to be implemented at the national or local level is not going to work, because that global body doesn't know priorities, national priorities, like hopefully a national government does. So what we've been calling calling for is enhanced direct access, which is to say that at the end of the day, every country is allocated money on the basis of some sort of formula or something like that. That money goes to a national institution. And many countries have already started setting up institutions such as this. You may have heard of the Bangladesh, it's called the Climate Trust Fund that they set up. And there are other sort of national funding entities, they're called, which are basically bodies within countries which collect funds from different sources and then have their way of decision making. And this would address many of the problems that we've been saying have plagued global financing in the past. One is mainstreaming. So here's a way in which you can get funds directly into the national budgets. So and the second is this whole project-based approach. This would not be about project-based approach. The third is about local community access. Most countries now have a devolved system of decentralized governance, and you can use those systems rather than trying to build new ones like they've done in the past. So there are many, many advantages. I mean, I think the biggest one is that there will be a much greater level of ownership over the activities there, and the funds will be much more sort of in the scrutiny of national systems of governance, whether it's parliaments, etc. So basically what we are trying to say is that this whole model where you focus so much on the point of deciding who gets how much money, because it's such a small limited pot, has to change. These decisions have to be made at the national level, so that's one of the arguments. And fortunately, the transitional committee, which was deciding the Global Climate Fund, it was quite a fight, but there is this paragraph which says that countries can set up these national funding entities, that there will be direct access. So all that is very positive, and hopefully it will go through. And luckily, the text was reopened for negotiation in Durban, so hopefully it will go through. Now,
I've done a bit of reading on the Green Climate Fund and how it's been evolving. I've constantly come across newspaper reports of the US and Saudi Arabia being like the bad boys in this set of negotiations. So, could you tell us a little about that?
Well, I can...
What are their reasons? I mean...
I only know the headlines of that, which is to say that the US wants, I think, a greater role for private sources of finance. And I mean, I think with the Saudis, it's impact measure, it's a response. Impact of response measures, isn't it? So those are the two. But you can see from that alliance that this is more. I think the bigger question here is the sort of statements that we've been hearing in the past few days coming out. For instance, the Canadian minister, before he left his country, environment minister, made a statement to the effect that developing countries are not going to get this money unless they agree to mitigation targets. You've had the EU commissioner, environment commissioner, climate change commissioner come out and say things like, I think the small island states will be our allies because they need the money. That sort of logic is perverse, because it's literally saying that we are going to hold the victims of climate change up till they do what we ask them to say. Yeah, and it's not even the small island states that are, that they want to negotiate with. So they're sort of building this sort of, again, a divide and rule almost, where they're trying to, make sure that, and it has happened because the LDCs, they see India, China very much as the problem. So I think that sort of logic has changed, and luckily, let's see how it goes now. But it's not all done, it's not all wrapped up, because now I think there's been a recent proposal by the US, and they would like the JEF to be the interim secretariat for the Green Climate Fund.
I've heard that the World Bank is the interim trustee.
They are the interim trustee. That was a deal that was made in the past. So the US wanted that, and there was some give and take that took place, and I think that it was the best damage control that could be done at that point.
So I now understand your point of why you started with the JEF.
Yes, because
so there is a real possibility. There's a real possibility that we could now go full circle and go back to the JEF.
This is literally like touching your nose all the way around. That you've made this argument that you don't want the JEF. You've gone through this design process, and you have now this Green Climate Fund. It's an idea that won't fly. I hope people will see that we didn't need the Green Climate Fund in the first best place if this is what we want. So in any case, that is going to be perhaps a trading card here at Durban in the final negotiations. I very much hope that the mitigation elements won't be held hostage, or the GCF won't be held hostage to the mitigation elements. But there's another element here that's really
what's
important.
What's the possibility of that? Give us a ballpark.
Well, I think that the idea is so ridiculous of the Jeff being the interim secretary that I hope it's nil. I hope that the US and its few allies stand alone on that and the rest see it. But it has been suggested by the developing countries, for instance, that UNOPS could be an interim secretarial department. That is the United Nations Project Operations Systems or something like that. You have to look it up, Wikipedia. But in any case, now there's another very important element to all of this, which is the standing committee, which is being sadly sidelined a bit in these negotiations, but it's really important, and let me try and explain why. So as we said in the past, the way the COP has managed the operating entity has been through a contact group under the SBI, and this contact group meets for very short periods of time and relies on the monitoring and evaluation reports that the GEF does, internal reports, and hence provides guidance on that basis. I mean, that's obviously a very faulty approach. You see, you do need a body, and especially because now we know that not all climate money is going to go through the Green Climate Fund. There's going to be other channels as well. There's going to be bilateral. There's going to be other, the World Banks, etc.
I think the phrase being used is a significant portion of long-term
that depends very much on who you speak to. But yes, it depends on who you speak. So the thing is that you need somebody who's got oversight of what's going on. First of all, to say how much money, is it sufficient? How much is needed to actually do a needs assessment rather than just whatever little dribbles down, sort of try to make do with that, but actually throw out assessments time to time to say, look, this is the magnitude, this is how much it's going to cost. And then on the other hand, it's this whole thing about actually monitoring these operating entities. You've had very random monitoring of the financial mechanisms so far, right? And you need a body that has an oversight, not just to see how much money flows through, whether that money is sufficient, but also to keep an eye on things like making sure that there is equal distribution between mitigation and adaptation. You know that mitigation is a pet subject, adaptation not so much. So you do need a serious body that does that sort of oversight, right? And so the standing committee was created in Cancun, and I think it's really important that Durban agrees to this oversight. It doesn't just sort of put it down to some body of the SBI or whatever, but rather keeps that line in that it will assist the COP.
By SBI you mean the subsidiary body
on implementation. That is a fairly important issue, which I think needs to be highlighted a bit more.
What do you think is going to happen? Do you think there will be an agreement?
It's being resisted because, I think the Europeans are far more willing to have strong monitoring, reporting and verification of finance, you see, but it's something that the US is just not willing to do.
Why?
Well, it's accountability, isn't it? It's like they feel that this is charity that they're handing out and they shouldn't be made to record it anywhere. So there is that element of not wanting that part to be monitored as much. So they resist it.
In general then, the outlook is positive so far as COP17 is concerned?
It's not looking as bad as could have been. It's not looking very good either. So let's see. The thing is that, so that's one important element. Just before I forget, to come back to long-term sources of finance. Again, for the first time, I think they're being considered seriously. But probably what's the best that will come out of this COP is that they will be perhaps a committee set up to look into what these long-term sources of finance can be. It is a fairly complicated issue, it does require some level of collaboration with other international institutes that manage, for instance, marine and aviation and stuff like that. So At least there is hope. There used to be a time when you talked about the so-called automatic sources of finance, it was automatically thrown off the table, but at least they're there, and hopefully there will be an agreement that comes out of Durban. I wanted to say that on the other hand, a lot does ride on the whole mitigation element, unfortunately, because that decides, I mean, you know, one of the things that I feel are so underrepresented at meetings like this is the fact that people are already dealing with climate impacts, and we're so behind, not just in trying to stop those impacts, but also in providing assistance to those people. So, I mean, on the one hand, the finance, technology elements, capacity elements are really important, but on the other hand,
I mean, in the sense that the more you drag your feet on mitigation,
the more it's going to cost you in terms of adaptation.
Yeah.
You see, so I mean, you have to realize that link, and I fear, and I hope I'm proven wrong, that this is just a whiling away of time until, you know, with more and more, well, I call it, you could say, legitimacy, they can demand developing countries come on and take what they call comparable targets. So I hope that they don't succeed in what they indicated before Durban started, that they would like to actually, you know, have something ready that starts implementation only in 2020. That would be disastrous, I think. That would more or less close the possibility that we're able to contain temperatures within 2 degrees centigrade. And we've got to keep the people in mind. I mean, this is not just about figures, it's about people. So I think that has to stay up front.
Yeah.